On one side, Genghis Khan, a name that sent cities trembling, whose raids had buried empires in dust, whose horses' hooves wrote the apocalypse across the lands of Asia. And on the other, Sultan Jalaluddin Khwarazm Shah, heir to a defeated empire, but not to broken courage. He had neither a vast army nor a stable realm, yet in his chest burned a fire that had refused to be extinguished. Genghis Khan was accustomed to conquest, but Jalaluddin was about to become a symbol of resistance. One before whom the world bowed, the other unwilling to bow before the world. This story begins at the moment when history decided that power and resolve would stand face to face, and the soil of Parwan would bear witness that steel is strengthened not by numbers, but by will. When the first rays of the sun fall upon the blood-stained battlefield, it is not only swords that clash, but wit and cunning confront each other as well. The Tartar warlords, whose veins ran deceit like blood, made a move that night which deceived every eye watching from afar. Those Tartars who had fallen during the day's battle were replaced with lifeless wooden and cloth effigies. They were mounted on horses and placed at some distance from the main army under the cover of darkness. At dawn's mist, these artificial riders appeared as though a new army was surging through the valleys. The next morning, both armies lined up once again. Shields glimmered, and the spearheads shone in the sunlight. Sultan Jalaluddin inspected his army when a few high-ranking officers arrived, visibly anxious. "Your Majesty, the Tartars are receiving massive reinforcements. Thousands of horsemen appear on the horizon." The Sultan lifted his gaze. At the far edge of the battlefield, there was indeed movement. Horses, riders, a new army. But his eyes, which saw not only the surface, but the truth beneath, were calm. The officers advised, "Our current numbers cannot withstand this flood. It would be better to retreat and fortify the highlands behind, from which we can keep the enemy at bay with archery and stone throwing." On the surface, it was wise counsel. Yet a shadow of tranquility rested on the Sultan's heart, as if he could hear the footsteps of divine victory. Perhaps he had already discerned the Tartars' trick. Perhaps he knew that the army, which from a distance looked like an endless sea, was in reality only a mirage of wood and cloth. He commanded calmly, "My orders are absolute. Dismount from your horses as yesterday, form the infantry ranks, and strike the enemy in a single charge." Upon hearing this, a ripple of unease spread through the troops, but before the Sultan's resolve, no one dared show hesitation. Horses were abandoned, swords were gripped firmly in hand, the ranks were formed, and then the army, strengthened not by numbers, but by conviction, fell upon the enemy like a storm shattering dry leaves. The battlefield was no longer merely a place of war, it had become a test of faith and deception. Then came the moment when the earth let out a groan, and the sky held its breath. The fierce battle had begun. Swords clashed like lightning, spear tips tore through chests, human bodies were shredded and thrown into the air. The Tatars attacked with wild fury, while the Muslims, on foot, steadfast, their faith as their shield, stood firm with unyielding courage. Saifuddin Ikrak's 40,000 warriors became an apocalypse for the enemy. Their strikes carried such force that the Tatar ranks trembled. But then, a storm of elite Tatar horsemen rushed to reinforce their lines. Between the left wing of the Islamic army and the right flank of the Tatars, a battle erupted so fierce that dust swallowed the sun. The assault was intense, yet the Turkish archers rained arrows so relentlessly from the front that the enemy faltered and began retreating. At that very moment, Sultan Jalaluddin, who led the heart of his army himself, struck the Tatar center like lightning. Their charge was so powerful that the enemy's formation broke. The Tatar ranks shattered, and they fled the battlefield. But the Sultan was not one to let the enemy escape alive. At his signal, the bugle sounded. He commanded, "Mount your horses and pursue the enemy." In the blink of an eye, the warriors of Islam mounted fresh horses and charged after the fleeing army with lightning speed. Ahead, the Tatars began regrouping in another field, as if all this were part of a larger trap, trying to lure the Islamic army to a specific location. But after a few fierce attacks, they realized that remaining there would be a death sentence, and by then, it was too late. The Sultan's forces pressed down upon them like an unstoppable flood. Finally, the Tatars turned and fled once more, but this time the pursuit was merciless. The swords of the Mujahideen reached the fleeing enemy's very heels. The majority of the Tatar forces were cut down. Historical accounts state that in this battle, Tuli Khan, one of Genghis Khan's sons, was also among the slain, though historians differ on this point. That day, the savage Tatars tasted the consequences of their own cruelty. Many were captured, the same Tatars about whom it was said that they would die fighting but never be taken prisoner. But history shattered that belief that day. Yes, the fire of vengeance also raged. Several soldiers and laborers vented their fury from their wounds upon the captives. This was the moment when war was not only fought on the battlefield, but also in the hearts of men. And then the Islamic army freed the Muslim prisoners whom the Tatars had brought along. Chains broke, and eyes long soaked in tears sparkled with the light of freedom. It was not just a victory in battle, it was the fall of a wall of fear. History witnessed that day that when faith, determination, and leadership stand together in a single line, even an army thought to be invincible can be brought to its knees.
Some cities on the pages of history are not made of bricks and stones alone. They are fortresses of resolve. At the same time, when Sultan Jalaluddin's sword was tearing through Tatar pride on the plains of Parwan, Genghis Khan was entangled with the formidable walls of Bamiyan, nestled in the shadows of the Koi Baba mountains. This city stood beneath the cliffs, yet its will was stronger than steel. The siege had lasted for a long time. Attacks came relentlessly, but the city's defenders refused to break. A few days later, the defeated commanders and remnants of the army from Parwan entered Genghis Khan's tent, trembling and gasping. They reported their forces had been scattered and that Tuli Khan had been killed. The man who had extinguished the lights of millions of homes now received the news of his son's death in his own tent. It is said that perhaps no moment in his life had been more bitter than this, and the wound that pierced his heart had been dealt by his greatest rival, Sultan Jalaluddin himself. Consumed by rage, Genghis Khan struck Bamiyan with renewed determination. He knew that before his final decisive encounter with the Sultan, the resistance of this fortified city had to end. But the people of Bamiyan were not to be underestimated. They had already removed large surrounding rocks so that the Tatars could not use them in their catapults. In response, wooden siege towers were erected opposite the city walls. The Tatars climbed them and collided with the city's defenders, but the walls rained down fire upon them and the wooden towers were engulfed in flames. The Tatars slaughtered livestock, wrapping their wet hides around the towers to protect them from burning. Thus, tactic after tactic, strategy upon strategy, the siege continued. Finally, Genghis Khan commanded, "Continue the assault until the fortress falls." The entire army surged upon the city like a flood. Stones and arrows rained from the walls like a storm, yet the attack did not cease. Amidst this chaos, one of Genghis Khan's grandsons, a favorite of his, was struck down by a Muslim archer's arrow. This news was like salt on an open wound. It is said that he had his grandson's body brought to the tent, removed his own head in grief, and like a madman, rushed through his ranks to the unit trying to breach the walls. Finding him among them, the Tatars' fervor doubled. Finally, a breach appeared in a section of the wall, and they entered the city. Then, what followed made even history tremble as it was written. A furious mad command was issued. Not a living being shall remain in the city. Destroy every building. A massacre erupted so brutal that humanity itself seemed to hide. Men, women, children, none were spared, not even animals. Corpses were desecrated, houses reduced to ash, trees uprooted, buildings leveled. When the Tatar army finally withdrew from Bamiyan, only piles of coal and ash remained. Yet, beneath the ashes, another truth lay buried. The defenders of Bamiyan had fought long and hard, inflicting severe losses to the Tatars. This was the place where they first received news of their army's defeat, where Tuli Khan's name was erased, and where the death of a grandson struck their pride like lightning. Perhaps that is why they began to call this city the bearer of sorrow. But history knows it was not only a message of grief, it was also proof that no matter how ruthless tyranny may be, a spark of resistance leaves a wound in its heart. Today's land called Afghanistan did not bear that name in those days. Most of it was then known as Khorasan, a vast region stretching to the Indus River, where the Pashtun settlements ended and beyond which were the lands of India. The word Afghanistan received official state recognition during the reign of Ahmad Shah Abdali, when the Durrani Empire gave this region a new political form. Later, the current borders were drawn during the rule of Amir Abdur Rahman Khan, following an agreement with the British, which established the Durand Line, separating a large area beyond it from Afghanistan's political limits. Thus, whenever this story mentions eastern, southern or northern Khorasan, it refers to regions of present-day Afghanistan. This is not merely a change of names, but a shift in the flow of history. What was Khorasan yesterday is Afghanistan today, yet the blood spilled in its soil, the echoes resonating through its mountains, and the battles fought in its valleys remain the same. This land is not just geography, it has been a symbol of struggle, resistance, and resilience. The question now is, the ashes of Bamiyan had barely cooled, the echoes of Parwan still lingered in the air, so where and how did Genghis Khan and Sultan Jalaluddin clash next? Was this land of Khorasan ready for another bloody chapter? In the next part, we will reach the turning point of this story, where history will not only be written, it will deliver its verdict from the riverbank itself.